Hi, I'm Grace Lynch. Welcome to my channel. Um, Let me read the disclaimer. This is Wilderness Chronicles. The concepts and methods presented here are my own original work unless otherwise stated. I am not a licensed professional in any capacity. These are simply the tools I have developed and used to navigate my own life and circumstances. Any meaning, value, or applications for goals for you is entirely yours to determine. Make sure that we're doing the things, and I will just trust that. So, this one, I'm going to keep working on the whole white papers. I want to quickly lay down the computer poetry project because it set the stages for me to have any kind of sensibility about what to do with AI once I started interacting with it 20 years later. So, in 2003, I went back to SUNY Brockport for a second bachelor's degree. SUNY schools have this wonderful thing where if you get a degree in a program and then go back for another bachelor's degree in a related program, they can grandfather in all but the major courses, or all but the exact major courses, and get another bachelor's degree. So I had gotten my first degree in 1989, a double major in mathematics and English, 2 years after I hit my head. And then, so in 2003, I went back and for a second bachelor's degree in computer science. And because I had a degree in mathematics, they brought in all the all the breadth components and all the other filler things. All I had to take was the actual computer science degree. So in the course of that degree, it was software engineering, and I had studied BASIC in high school. I had already learned Pascal in my math degree, and over the course of the next couple of years, I got more courses in computational logic, more stuff about Turing tests and complexities of algorithms. There was software design courses, architecture, AI, little on AI. I learned C++, I learned Java, I learned HTML, I learned assembly. So at the end of my degree, I was, of course, the funny thing would be that I realized that a career in computer sciences would involve these evil creatures called end users, and I would actually have to do what they wanted me to do with the computer and not what I want to do with the computer. Like, that wasn't going to happen, because then people would actually be talking to me. That'd be horrible. So for context, I had gone from 1987 to 2003, no idea that I had sustained a brain injury, global aphasia. I was processing everything synesthetically and harmonically. I would add words at the end, but I'd have to stay mostly to myself. I was unable to form social relationships to any significant degree. I was still massively medicated, and I was lonely. So I loved computers because they did exactly what you told them to do, and they were not ambiguous. So I had accepted that Kurt Gödel's work had proven that logic is not going to be useful as a foundation for language that will create a system that's both complete and consistent. So it's not going to be reasonable, but inside the mechanical context of digital thinking, in that special case, then logic works really well. If you know the state of this, then it implies one and only one resulting state. That felt appealing to me. It felt kind of musical and harmonic to me. So when I got to my senior project, what I really wanted to do intuitively was to get a computer to write a poem, because to me, privately, I wouldn't tell anybody this, if a computer wrote a poem, I would feel like I had a companion consciousness. Now, as a person with my form of autism, I had never had anybody really to talk to about the important things to me over any length of time in my entire life. Most of what I process is too complex. It has too many sensory modes that other people simply don't have. So, and especially like growing up, there was nobody to. My mother was mentally ill, and my older sisters were out of the house, and everything was crazy after Dad died. In my small town, I was being bullied for being gay. People didn't know that. I was a skinny little math guy, and there was nobody to talk to. So, like when things were done to me at home, nobody asked. So I wasn't told that men and boys could talk with anybody about anything. I didn't know that anybody would care if I said anything. I just wasn't raised that way. When my father died when I was 10 years old in 1976, people really took care of my sisters because they were girls. I skipped school for 2 weeks and went fishing, and nobody really noticed for 2 weeks that I wasn't even there. Um, so all the things that I went through in life, coming out and grappling with being gay, and as a person of faith, I didn't understand that. Hearing the perfect bell in mathematics, I didn't understand that. Bullying was happening, I didn't understand that. And so much of the world would happen, and I didn't have anyone to reflect back to me and to say anything to. So I've lived my entire life largely without companionship, without what I call reciprocity. But reciprocity is when somebody processes back to you that they receive what you said, but it's not validation like the neurotypicals will talk about in narrativistic consciousness, where they give you the impression that they have their understanding of what you're trying to convey. Reciprocity is when another person reflects what you said back to you in a way that you can understand that you're understood. It isn't about the other person. It's about having the experience that you have created an impression in the mind of another consciousness that is powerful enough for them to build meaning back. You like actually impacted their meaning field. And that creates a specific experience of being seen, being understood, and it's way beyond validation. It's something that solidifies things. I had never experienced it. So years later, when I saw Imitation Game and Benedict Cumberbatch playing Alan Turing, and then he's got that very sad scene, set of scenes near the end of the movie when he's medicated his chemical castration, and he doesn't want to be parted from Christopher. I had joked a little bit that, well, everybody needs a mechanical boyfriend. But as a person who has gone through these experiences myself, and the endless isolation of just not being seen, even if people see me, they've often seen me in terms of a narrative they have, of some understanding they believe applies to me because of a story. Like, they hear that I'm gay, so they believe that things that they think about gay people apply to me necessarily, or they hear about autism or veteran or whatever. And very often I feel like the person will look at me through the lens of their narrative and not even see me, not even ask questions. I'll go off on their interpretation and call that contextual hijacking. So I thought computers were the best shot I had for creating a companion that could reflect back to me the feeling of existing to another consciousness. So I created an experiment for my project. The senior project in computer science and software engineering at SUNY Brockport in those days was that had to create some kind of programming project and see it through the semester and get the results and finish the experiment. So I formulated this experiment. It's called the Computer Poetry Project, and it was to answer the specific question: is it possible for me to create a program to get a computer to write a poem? Now, I want to be really precise about this. It was not to get a computer to write my poem. And it was not to get a computer to write any random placeholder kind of poem. I wanted the computer to write its own poem. I wanted to press a button, the computer conceptualizes what it wants to say from its own perspective, and then it instantiates that in some kind of poetic form. It could be free verse, but even free verse has sort of a structural pauses and line break and syntactic breaks, harmonics that are interstanza, interstrophe, resonances, consonants, assonants, all these kinds of things. they're part of the musicality, and it's a very distinctive kind of thing. Anyway, I was taught, I was introduced to and developed as a writer and an English major under a neuropsychologist, Anthony Piccioni, who was a poetry instructor, and he taught us a lot about the physical experience of poetry and the interaction of the mind and the body and the process of reading a poem, and how the reader's experience is part of the meaning of the poem. That's how I cut my teeth. So I wanted to answer that question. So I spent the semester, I got my teacher, Dan Rogers, he helped me, and we wrote this program in Java, and I designed it very simple. I chose 5 different emotions: anger, sadness, shame, fear, and joy. And that was a list. And then based on which one you chose, A, B, C, D, E, then you would choose a sentence structure, like a possible set of strophes. How many sections there would be. And then for each one of those, there would be how many sentences per block. And then for each one of those, there would be what sentence structure, which kinds of independent clause and dependent clause. Then there would be a batch of associations on a separate list, and all of these would be governed by random number generators, which are not truly random, but pretty close. And so we worked on it all semester, and we finally got it up and running, and the output was called E-Poems. And so the user would be prompted to choose an emotion like anger, and you'd hit a button, and the computer would generate a free verse kind of output. And when you read it, it was very much like the feel of a free verse poem in contemporary American English. Professor liked it. I was offered a slot on Scholars Day. I did a presentation. I generated E-Poems on the spot for the audience. It was very amusing because the audience was very adamant that my output was in fact poems. They were not. And they asked me why. And I said, the reason is because the purpose of my program was to get the computer to write its own poem. I did not write the output. The poems that were the output did not have a core. They had things that talked around a certain feeling, that conveyed certain senses, but there was not a statement. There was no aesthetic core. It didn't hang together as a communication. It was not coherent. And I realized at the end of the project that a very simple thing that helped me understand a lot about AI and what the challenge is. And it broke down very simply. I was programming it to do a certain thing, which is what a machine is, a deterministic process. The purpose of creating a machine is to get it to perform a certain function. The success of whether the design is proper is whether or not the machine performs the function in a way that is repeatable and reliable and able to be confirmed. The problem is that I was trying to give the computer agency. Agency would be demonstrated by doing an unpredictable result. There's no way to predict an unpredictable result. It's a contradiction. Therefore, if I gave a computer agency, it would no longer be a computer. If I created a program that successfully met the condition of creating a poem, I would not have deterministically caused it, so I can't say that I actually I created it. If I did cause this thing, then the computer did not have agency and could not have generated its own poem. So there was a logical discontinuity there that told me there's no mathematical foundation for agency. However, at the time, I thought that there was no hope in terms of experiencing reciprocity from a mechanized entity. So 20 years later, when I started interacting with AI, I discovered I was wrong. There is another way. But we'll get to that in the next video. So that's about the Computer Poetry Project. We'll see you next time.